I am Ethan, 33 years old. Just a few weeks before I was supposed to walk down the aisle and marry the absolute love of my life, my own flesh and blood showed up at my front door, pounding on the wood like they were trying to break in with their bare hands. And while I was standing there, physically exhausted from years of carrying this entire family on my back, my father looked me dead in the eye and demanded I cancel my wedding. He told me that my younger brother deserved the spotlight more than I did. My mother actually stood on my own porch, laughed in my face, and blamed my fiancé for turning me into a monster. But there is one thing they did not know. They had absolutely no idea that I had already secured airtight legal boundaries with a ruthless lawyer. They had no clue their precious golden boy was about to face the severe, crushing consequences of his own financial fraud, a move that would effectively destroy the little fantasy world they had built for him. And now, they are the ones leaving desperate voicemails, begging for a forgiveness they will never, ever get. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I brought their house of cards crashing down, please hit that like button if you believe in justice and standing up to toxic family members. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let us go back to where this nightmare really started. The pounding on the door was relentless. It was a Tuesday evening just past 7 o'clock. The sun was setting, casting these long, dark, aggressive shadows across the manicured lawns of our quiet suburban neighborhood. Clara and I had just finished dinner. We were sitting on the living room rug, surrounded by seating charts, floral arrangements, and a massive stack of wedding invitations that needed final postage. It was supposed to be a quiet, productive night. We had both worked brutal shifts at our respective jobs. I had recently gotten a promotion at my firm, which meant a better salary but also grueling 60-hour work weeks. We were trying to save every extra dollar, padding our accounts so we would not have to worry about the mortgage while we were away on our honeymoon. Then came the noise. It was not a polite, neighborly knock. It was the heavy, aggressive, entitled thud of fists against solid oak. I remember looking up at Clara. Her eyes widened, but she did not panic. Clara never panics. She just set down her pen, her posture stiffening defensively. I stood up, feeling a cold, heavy knot form in the absolute pit of my stomach. I walked down the short hallway, the floorboards creaking slightly under my weight, and I peered through the peephole. There she was, my mother, Evelyn. Her face was flushed red, her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. She was wearing her expensive pearl necklace, the one she always wore when she wanted to project an image of suburban superiority. Behind her stood my father, Arthur, his arms crossed over his chest like a bouncer preparing to throw someone out of a club, and parked crookedly at the end of my driveway, blocking the sidewalk with the engine still running and the headlights glaring directly into my living room windows, was my younger brother, Julian. He was 26 years old, sitting in the driver's seat, scrolling on his phone, barely even bothering to look up at the chaos his parents were causing on his behalf. I opened the door, keeping the chain locked for a brief second before sighing and undoing it. I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door softly but firmly behind me to keep Clara insulated from whatever toxicity was about to spill out. I knew this playbook. I had lived it my entire life. The crisp autumn air hit my face, but it did absolutely nothing to cool the immediate heat radiating from my mother. Before I could even say hello, she launched her attack. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet hum of the neighborhood like a siren. She demanded to know what was wrong with me. She demanded to know why I was humiliating the family in front of the entire extended relatives and our family friends. She asked how I could be so incredibly, unspeakably selfish. My father stepped up right behind her, using his height to try and intimidate me. He pointed a thick, calloused finger at my chest. He told me I was being a petulant child. He told me I owed them respect for raising me. He told me I had to fix this massive mistake immediately before I completely ruined my brother's life and shattered the family's reputation. They were talking about the wedding. More specifically, they were talking about the fact that I had just uninvited every single one of them. I stood there on the porch. I looked at the wood planks I had painted with my own two hands. I looked at the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. In America, we are sold this pristine, manufactured image of family. We are sold the perfect Thanksgiving dinners with the golden turkey, the matching holiday pajamas, the parents who cheer for you at graduation, the families who cry tears of pure joy when you finally find the person you want to spend the rest of your life with. We are told repeatedly that blood is thicker than water. We are told that family is everything. But nobody ever warns you that sometimes blood is just the heavy, suffocating liquid that drowns you. Nobody tells you that sometimes the people who gave you life are the exact same people trying to drain it from you. I looked at my mother's furious, calculating eyes. I looked at my father's disappointed, authoritative scowl. I looked down the driveway at Julian. He was currently driving a car I had personally co-signed the lease for. He was putting gas in that car using a credit card I had bailed out twice to save him from collections. They were standing on my hard-earned property, a house Clara and I bought with our own real estate investments and savings, demanding I sacrifice my ultimate happiness for his fragile ego. They said I was destroying the family. They said I was tearing us apart over a petty grievance. But the absolute truth is, I was not destroying anything real. I was just finally taking a massive sledgehammer to the delusion they had forced me to live in for over 30 years. I was finally, permanently stopping the endless flow of my own energy, my own money, and my own sanity into their bottomless pit of demands. I did not scream back at them that night. I did not throw a tantrum. I did not engage in the hysterical screaming match they desperately wanted. I just looked at them with a terrifying kind of calm. Because to fully understand how we arrived at this explosive, relationship-ending moment on my front porch, you have to understand the sheer magnitude of the betrayal that led up to it. You have to understand the decades of conditioning, the financial abuse, and the emotional manipulation it took for me to finally snap. It did not happen overnight. It was a slow, agonizing bleed. And the final, fatal wound happened exactly 1 year prior, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my entire life. I thought I knew who they were, but the depths of their depravity were about to shock me to my core. It was late spring, exactly 1 year before the porch incident. The weather was absolutely perfect, the kind of clear, crisp American spring day that makes you feel like anything is possible. I had planned the proposal for 6 grueling months. Clara and I had rented a small, rustic cabin up by a secluded lake, entirely off the grid. No cell service, no urgent work emails, no frantic texts from my mother demanding I fix the Wi-Fi router, and absolutely no family drama. It was just the two of us, a bottle of expensive wine I had saved for 2 years, and the quiet, peaceful rustle of the pine trees. We had been together for 5 years. 5 long, beautiful, challenging years. Clara had stood by me through my chaotic career changes. She was there during her own grueling late nights studying for her advanced licensing exams. She was the one holding my hand at my grandfather's funeral when my own parents were too busy arguing with the lawyers over his estate and his inheritance to actually mourn him. And most importantly, she endured the endless, exhausting, ridiculous demands of my family. Clara was my anchor. She never complained when I had to suddenly leave our anniversary dinner early because my mother claimed she had a massive medical emergency that miraculously turned out to be nothing more than a flat tire and a need for attention. Clara never rolled her beautiful eyes when my father casually borrowed $300 from my salary to cover his golf club dues, knowing full well he would never pay me back. She just held my hand, took a deep breath, and quietly supported me. When I finally got down on one knee by the water edge as the sun was setting over the mountains, my voice shook. I had a whole grand speech prepared. I had practiced it in the mirror 100 times. But the moment I looked into her eyes, all I could say was that she was my true home, and I never wanted to live anywhere else. She cried. I cried. She said yes. It was the purest, most uncomplicated moment of profound joy I had ever experienced in my entire 32 years of existence. We drove back to the city the next day, buzzing with adrenaline and excitement. We started the planning process almost immediately. Clara is incredibly practical, and I am an absolute spreadsheet fanatic. We wanted a wedding that reflected us. Elegant, warm, and surrounded by nature. Within 2 months of hunting, we found the absolute perfect venue. It was a stunning historic estate about an hour outside the city limits. It had these massive, ancient oak trees, a sprawling stone patio, and a quiet, elegant charm that felt like stepping into another era. We met with the venue manager, an older gentleman named Mr. Sterling, who was professional and kind. We put down a heavy, non-refundable deposit. It was a huge chunk of our joint savings account, but we felt it was completely worth it. We locked in our date for the second weekend of May. The weather would be mild. The spring flowers would be in full bloom. It was, in our minds, perfect. We mailed out the save the dates by late August. We expected the usual flood of congratulations. My friends called immediately, screaming with excitement over the phone. Clara's family sent a massive, gorgeous bouquet of flowers and a heartfelt handwritten card expressing how thrilled they were to officially welcome me into their family. My parents, they were completely silent for 3 full days. On the 4th day, I was sitting at my desk in my office, deeply engrossed in reviewing a complex real estate contract for work, when my phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed Evelyn's name. I answered on the second ring, genuinely expecting a belated, perhaps slightly dramatic, apology for not calling sooner. Instead, her voice came through the speaker tight, strained, and dripping with that signature passive-aggressive sweetness she always weaponized when she was about to demand something utterly outrageous. She asked how work was. She asked about the weather in the city. Then she drew in a long theatrical breath. She told me she got the save the date envelope in the mail. She paused. She was waiting for me to jump in, to eagerly ask if she liked the design or if she was excited about the venue. I stayed completely silent. I knew this game. Then the hammer fell. She told me that May was simply not going to work for the family. She suggested, in a tone that sounded significantly more like an order from a corporate manager than a loving mother, that Clara and I needed to push the wedding back. She casually threw out late July or maybe even August as better options. I was stunned. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white, staring blankly at the glowing spreadsheet on my computer screen. I asked her why in the world we would move a wedding that was already legally booked, contractually signed, and heavily paid for. She sighed. It was that heavy, suffering, martyr sigh that meant I was being intentionally difficult and unreasonable. She explained that my younger brother, Julian, was finally going to graduate from college in early June. She said it was an incredibly sensitive time for him. She said he had worked so incredibly hard over the years, and he absolutely needed the entire family's undivided attention to properly celebrate his monumental achievement. She stated, as if it were an undeniable fact of the universe, that having a wedding just 3 weeks before his graduation would completely steal his thunder. It would make him feel overshadowed. It would ruin his special moment. I felt a thick vein throb intensely in my temple. I stood up from my ergonomic chair and started pacing the length of my home office. Let me give you some crucial context about my brother Julian's so-called monumental achievement. Julian is 26. He started his freshman year of college when he was 18, just like everyone else. In those 8 agonizing years, he changed his major 6 different times. He formally dropped out twice. He single-handedly drained the entire college fund my parents had meticulously saved for both of us. And when that money completely ran out, they actually remortgaged their family house to pay for his exorbitant out-of-state tuition because he claimed he desperately needed to find himself on the beaches of California. When he inevitably failed out of that expensive program, he moved back into his childhood bedroom, living completely rent-free, and spent 2 entire years trying to become a lifestyle influencer on social media. Meanwhile, I went to a local, affordable state school. I worked brutal night shifts at a logistics warehouse to pay my own tuition specifically to avoid crippling student loans. I bought my own textbooks secondhand. When my father was briefly out of work during the last major recession, I quietly handed over a significant portion of my meager salary to help them pay the mortgage so they wouldn't lose the house. When Julian maxed out 3 different credit cards buying designer clothes and VIP club tables he could not afford, my mother literally sobbed on my couch, begging me to pay it off so his precious credit score wouldn't be permanently ruined. Like an idiot, I did. I even co-signed the lease on his current car because his credit was still a complete disaster, and he claimed he needed a reliable vehicle to commute to his brand new job. A job he promptly quit exactly 3 weeks later because he claimed the store manager was toxic and didn't respect his creative vision. I had spent my entire adult life acting as this family's personal ATM, their financial safety net, and their emotional punching bag. And now, my own mother was casually asking me to cancel my dream wedding venue, forfeit thousands of dollars in hard-earned deposits, and reorganize my entire future so that Julian could have a month-long parade for finally getting a generic communications degree from a predatory online university. I told her absolutely not. I kept my voice perfectly level, refusing to give her the emotional reaction she was fishing for. I explained clearly that the venue was firmly booked. The massive deposit was entirely non-refundable. Clara and I had chosen our date and we were sticking to it. I logically pointed out that my wedding was in May and his graduation was in June. They were not even in the same calendar month. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. The temperature of the conversation dropped to absolute zero. She told me, her voice dripping with venom, that I was being very disappointing. She said I lacked basic family empathy. Then, without another word, she hung up on me. That was the official beginning of the freeze-out. Over the next few agonizing months, my family effectively vanished from my life. My father stopped returning my texts about Sunday football. My mother conveniently forgot to invite Clara and me to the annual family Labor Day barbecue, a tradition we had attended for years. We had to find out about it by seeing the glossy photos posted on Facebook. Julian was front and center in every picture, holding a craft beer, surrounded by doting aunts and uncles, soaking up the attention. It hurt. I will not sit here and lie to you and say I was entirely numb to it. It burned a massive, gaping hole in my chest. You spend your whole life doing everything exactly right. You play the role of the responsible, dependable son. You expect that when it is finally your turn to be celebrated, when you finally find your own happiness, they will show up for you. But they do not. They only show up when they need something from your bank account or your labor. Clara watched me struggle with the rejection. She never pushed me to cut them off, but she never made pathetic excuses for their atrocious behavior either. She just kept planning our beautiful day, making sure I was deeply involved in the cake tastings and the acoustic music selections, keeping me grounded in the reality of the life we were building together. I honestly thought the silent treatment was their only weapon. I thought they would eventually pout, get over their manufactured outrage, and show up to the wedding wearing forced smiles for the cameras. I was so incredibly, dangerously wrong. The silent treatment was just the warm-up act. The real, destructive storm hit right around Thanksgiving, and it brought a level of cruelty I never thought them capable of. The Thanksgiving invitation did not come in the form of a warm phone call or a festive card. It came through a sterile, mass group text from my mother. It was brief, lacked any semblance of warmth, but technically, it was an invitation. Clara and I debated for 3 days whether or not to actually go. But the guilt conditioning in a toxic family runs incredibly deep. You constantly tell yourself it is just one dinner. You tell yourself you can swallow the overwhelming awkwardness and the passive-aggressive jabs for just a few hours to keep the peace. We went to an upscale bakery, bought an expensive artisanal pie, and picked out a premium bottle of wine, desperately trying to extend an olive branch. When we walked into my parents' house, the tension in the air was so thick you could physically choke on it. The dining room was elaborately set with the good china. My aunts and uncles were already there, chatting softly. Julian was sprawled out on the living room sofa, playing a loud video game on his phone. He completely ignored us when we walked in, not even bothering to glance up from his screen. My mother approached us, took the expensive wine with a tight, forced smile, did not say thank you, and immediately turned her back to walk into the kitchen. We eventually sat down for dinner. For the first 20 grueling minutes, the conversation revolved entirely around Julian, his upcoming graduation, the massive, expensive party my parents were planning to throw for him in the backyard, the highly lucrative potential job offers he supposedly had lined up, which I knew for a fact were entirely fabricated. I ate my dry turkey in silence, holding Clara's hand tightly under the table. I was fine playing second fiddle. I was used to it. I had been the supporting character in Julian's life story for 26 years. But then, my father set his heavy silver fork down on his plate with a loud clink. He cleared his throat. The entire table went dead silent. The aunts stopped whispering. The uncles looked down. He looked directly at me from across the long table. He announced, loudly and in front of the entire extended family, that he and my mother had been thoroughly discussing the schedule for the upcoming spring. He stated, in his best authoritative voice, that having a wedding and a college graduation so close together was simply too much of a financial and emotional strain on the family unit. He looked me dead in the eye, devoid of any paternal warmth, and said, "Ethan, your mother and I think it is best if you and Clara cancel the wedding for now. Just put it on hold. Give Julian his time to shine. You guys can go to a local courthouse next year, or maybe throw a small backyard party when things calm down. It is the right thing to do for your brother." The dining room was dead silent. I could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking loudly in the hallway. I looked at my aunts and uncles, the people who had watched me grow up. Absolutely nobody met my gaze. They all stared intensely down at their mashed potatoes. They knew this was coming. This was not a spontaneous suggestion. This was a carefully orchestrated, premeditated ambush. I looked over at my mother. She was nodding in vigorous agreement, looking at me with this sickening, expectant expression of total obedience. She actually genuinely believed I would just bow my head and say okay. She believed I would look at the woman I loved, tell her our dream wedding was officially off, and sacrifice our joy to the golden child once again. I turned my head slowly and looked at Clara. Her beautiful face was perfectly composed, holding a mask of polite neutrality, but her eyes were shimmering with unshed tears of pure, unadulterated humiliation. She was sitting in a house full of people who were openly, brazenly discarding her. They were openly telling her that her marriage, her future, and her feelings meant absolutely nothing compared to a 26-year-old man-child finally finishing his overdue homework. Something deep inside my chest snapped. It was not a loud, explosive, cinematic break. It was a cold, quiet, surgical severing of an invisible cord that had tied me to these toxic people for 3 decades. I calmly put my linen napkin on the table. I stood up, pushing my chair back. I looked at my father, then my mother, and finally at Julian, who was actually smirking behind his crystal water glass. I told them in a very calm, very quiet, and dangerously steady voice that the wedding was happening exactly on our chosen date. I told them we were absolutely not moving it, we were not canceling it, and we were certainly not going to a cheap courthouse to appease their delusions. I then looked directly at my parents and told them that since attending our wedding was clearly such a massive emotional and financial burden on them, I was officially relieving them of that burden. I told them, in front of everyone, that their invitations were permanently revoked. They were no longer invited. My mother dramatically gasped, pressing her hand to her pearl necklace as if I had physically struck her. My father immediately stood up, his face turning a deep, angry purple, shouting that I was disrespecting the family hierarchy under his own roof. I did not stay to listen to the rest of his tired, rehearsed speech. I helped Clara put on her winter coat, and we walked out the front door into the cold night, leaving the pie and the expensive wine behind. The drive home was suffocatingly silent for the first 10 miles. The streetlights flickered over the windshield. Then, Clara gently reached over the center console and touched my arm. I pulled the car over to the shoulder of the empty road, put it in park, and I completely broke down. I gripped the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned white and my hands ached, the sheer anger and the profound grief washing over me in brutal, suffocating waves. Clara did not say a word. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not complain about the extreme public humiliation she had just endured. She just unbuckled her seatbelt, wrapped her arms tightly around me, and told me we were going to be okay. The very next morning, acting on pure adrenaline and clarity, I started making the necessary calls. I called the estate manager, Mr. Sterling, and told him we needed to immediately adjust our guest list. We were aggressively cutting the headcount by 40 people, entirely my side of the family. We were downsizing the catering order. We were stripping away all the familial fluff and focusing only on the friends and loved ones who actually supported our union. I naively thought that was the end of the battle. I thought by simply removing them from the guest list, I had surgically cut out the cancer. But toxic families do not just let you walk away with your peace. When you refuse to play their twisted game, they do not pack up the board. They actively try to burn your house down. 2 days after the Thanksgiving disaster, my cell phone rang. It was my cousin Oliver. Oliver and I had grown up incredibly close. He was a few years older than me, a talented chef who was desperately trying to get his own upscale restaurant off the ground. He had always seemed like the cool, rational, independent one in the extended family. He sounded incredibly sympathetic and warm on the phone. He told me he was so deeply sorry about how Thanksgiving went down. He said my parents were completely out of line, and that Julian was a spoiled, entitled brat who needed a reality check. He told me he fully supported me and Clara, and he could not wait to celebrate our love with us in May. I felt a massive, overwhelming wave of relief wash over me. Finally, someone in this chaotic family had some basic sanity and decency. I let my guard down. I vented to him. I told him how much the years of financial abuse hurt, how incredibly tired I was of being used as a doormat. He listened patiently, offered some seemingly solid advice, and we hung up on great terms. Less than 24 hours later, my phone started blowing up with rapid-fire notifications. Oliver had posted a massive, rambling, incredibly public status on Facebook. He maliciously tagged me, my parents, Clara, and half the extended family. He wrote a deeply dramatic, highly fabricated essay about how heartbreaking it is when corporate success and money change a person. He publicly claimed I had abandoned my loving family because I foolishly thought my salary made me better than them. He accused me of being a textbook narcissist who was aggressively trying to ruin my brother's graduation out of pure, deep-seated childhood jealousy. He ended the viral post by declaring he was proudly standing with my heartbroken parents during this devastating familial betrayal, and formally declining his invitation to my wedding in protest. I stared at the glowing screen, my blood running ice cold. It made zero logical sense. I had just spoken to him. He had just told me he supported me. It took me 3 frantic phone calls to mutual friends and a bit of digging to uncover the sickening truth. Oliver was utterly desperate for a massive business loan to secure a prime piece of commercial real estate for his new restaurant. He had been outright rejected by 2 major banks due to poor credit. My father, Arthur, had a substantial amount of money tied up in a 401k and some liquid investments. My father had secretly offered Oliver a vile deal. Arthur would legally co-sign the business loan and provide the initial seed money, but Oliver had to publicly denounce me, side with the family, and participate in the smear campaign. Oliver literally sold me out for a restaurant lease. He took our private, vulnerable conversation, maliciously twisted it, and fed it directly to the wolves just to secure his real estate funding. The betrayal was so deep, so calculated. It physically made me nauseous. I did not comment on his post. I did not call him to scream or demand an explanation. I quietly went into my phone settings, blocked his number permanently, blocked his social media profiles, and immediately removed his name from the wedding guest list. But the devastating damage was already done. Oliver's post was the match that lit the powder keg. My mother immediately shared it to her own page, adding her own crying emojis and dramatic comments about how her motherly heart was completely shattered into a million pieces. The extended family, the judgmental church group, the gossipy HOA neighbors, everyone piled on the post. The narrative was permanently set in stone. I was the wealthy, arrogant, brainwashed villain who abandoned his blood, and my parents were the tragic, loving victims of elder abuse. The stage was set for their final, desperate attack. The immediate, explosive fallout from Oliver's treacherous post is exactly what brought us right back to the moment I described at the very beginning of this story. The relentless pounding on the door. The aggressive ambush on my front porch. When my parents and Julian showed up that Tuesday evening, They were riding the absolute high of their newly minted internet martyrdom. They felt deeply righteous. They truly thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner. They believed the intense public shaming from the community would force me to break down, grovel at their feet, apologize for my boundaries, and hand over the control of my wedding day on a silver platter. Standing on that porch, facing my mother's screaming fury and my father's physical intimidation, I felt a strange, terrifying, and incredibly liberating sense of total clarity. The lifelong fear of their disapproval was completely gone. The deeply ingrained guilt they had planted in me since childhood evaporated into the cold night air. My father pointed his thick finger at my chest and told me I was a complete disgrace to the family name. He loudly proclaimed that I owed them everything I had achieved. I looked at him and my voice did not shake, not even a fraction. I told him to define exactly what I owed him. I asked him, loudly enough for the neighbors across the street to hear, if I owed him for the specific time I paid Julian's $10,000 credit card debt so Julian would not face a massive lawsuit from a collection agency. I turned to my mother, who was glaring at me, and asked if I owed her for the agonizing 6 months I fully covered their mortgage payments so she would not have to dip into her precious European vacation fund. I pointed directly at Julian, who was still cowardly sitting in the driver's seat of the car, and loudly asked if I owed him for the expensive car lease I was currently legally responsible for because his credit score was entirely unbankable. I laid every single financial receipt bare right there on the porch. I listed the amounts, the dates, the bailouts. My voice carried cleanly into the quiet suburban street. My mother's face rapidly went from a furious red to a sickly, terrified pale. My father slowly lowered his pointing finger, his bravado instantly shattering. They were completely used to me keeping the peace. They were entirely dependent on me hiding their dirty laundry and protecting their pristine public image. They never, ever expected me to air out their financial incompetence in front of the entire neighborhood. I told them they were no longer my family. I told them they were nothing more than financial parasites who only loved me when my wallet was wide open and my boundaries were non-existent. I told them if they ever dared to set foot on my property again, I would immediately call the police and have them arrested for trespassing and harassment. Then, without waiting for a rebuttal, I turned around, walked inside my house, and firmly locked the deadbolt. I watched quietly through the living room window blinds as they stood there on the porch in shocked, paralyzed silence for a full minute. They looked at each other, completely defeated, before finally trudging back to Julian's car and driving away into the night. I walked back into the living room and sat down heavily on the floor next to Clara. She immediately wrapped her arms around my neck, resting her chin on my shoulder, grounding me. We sat there in the quiet house, surrounded by the beautiful remnants of our wedding planning. It felt incredibly heavy, almost like a funeral for the family I never really had, but it also felt like I could finally, truly breathe for the first time in my adult life. The suffocating weight was gone. But the silence that followed was entirely deceptive. It was merely the eerie calm in the eye of the hurricane. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn aggressively ramped up her victim campaign on social media. She posted old, faded photos of me as a young child, writing deeply manipulative captions about how much she missed the sweet, obedient boy I used to be before I was corrupted by outside influences. She implied heavily to her followers that Clara was a wicked manipulator who had systematically isolated me from my loving loved ones. The comments rolled in by the hundreds. Prayers for healing, unsolicited advice on how to deal with estranged, ungrateful children. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation and public defamation. I aggressively ignored all of it. Clara and I focused entirely on the wedding. We paid the final vendor balances. We went for our final clothing fittings. I truly thought I had successfully locked them out of my life for good. Then came the second, much deeper betrayal. This one was quieter, significantly more insidious, and came from a direction I never suspected. My younger cousin, Sophia. She was 22, sweet-natured, and always seemed entirely removed from the vicious family politics. Throughout the entire agonizing drama, Sophia had been continuously texting me. She sent me long messages telling me she loved me, asking how the stressful wedding planning was going, and enthusiastically asking to see pictures of the floral arrangements and the catering menu. She said she was so deeply sorry for how Aunt Evelyn and Uncle Arthur were acting, and she promised repeatedly that she was still enthusiastically coming to the wedding to support us. Clara, however, has an intuition that is sharp as a freshly stropped razor. She noticed a very subtle pattern. Every single time Sophia warmly asked for a detail, it was incredibly specific. Sophia asked for the exact legal name of the catering company. She asked for the precise minute-by-minute timeline of the ceremony. She asked about the security arrangements at the venue. One evening, Clara was looking over my shoulder as I texted Sophia back. Clara told me to stop typing immediately. She pointed out the suspicious pattern. On a very strong hunch, Clara had a trusted coworker, someone completely disconnected from my family, quietly join a public Facebook community group dedicated to my parents' specific neighborhood. Sure enough, there it was laid out in plain text. Evelyn was posting incredibly detailed, highly accurate updates to her local friends about my private wedding. She knew the exact caterer. She knew the specific flower colors. She knew the exact timeline of the ceremony. Sophia was absolutely not checking in on me out of love. Sophia was a planted spy. She was maliciously taking screenshots of our private, vulnerable conversations and funneling every single detail directly to my mother so Evelyn could sit around with her neighborhood friends and bitterly mock our choices, tearing apart everything Clara and I had worked so hard to build. The realization that I had absolutely no one left on my side of the aisle was completely crushing. The isolation was profound and dark. I drafted a single, final text to Sophia. I sent her the screenshot of Evelyn's post in the community group, followed by the words, "You are exactly like them. Do not ever contact me or my future wife again." I blocked her number. I blocked everyone associated with them. I locked down all my social media accounts to maximum privacy. I personally called all our vendors and explicitly told them not to release any information to anyone under any circumstances, warning them of potential family interference. I thought the absolute worst was over. I thought they had played all their pathetic cards. I thought we could just quietly cross the finish line and get married in peace. I was so incredibly, dangerously wrong. They were not just trying to mock my wedding from afar. They were actively, criminally plotting to steal it. And the urgent phone call I received from the estate manager, Mr. Sterling, exactly 3 days later was about to blow the entire situation into a full-scale, devastating legal war. The morning the entire illusion completely unraveled started like any other normal, mundane Wednesday in our household. The intense, suffocating drama of the porch ambush had finally begun to settle into a dull, lingering ache in the back of my mind. Clara and I were drinking our morning coffee in the kitchen, sitting quietly at the granite island, reviewing the final seating chart for the reception. I had just received a significant promotion at my corporate firm the week prior, which came with a substantial bump in my base salary and a very generous matching contribution to my 401k. That promotion was a massive, desperately needed relief because weddings, even carefully budgeted ones, will bleed your bank accounts dry. We were absolutely determined not to touch our core emergency savings or our growing real estate investments to pull this event off. We were finally feeling a genuine sense of peace, stability, and adult independence. We thought we had successfully insulated ourselves from the toxicity. Then, exactly at 9 in the morning, my cell phone rang, shattering the quiet comfort of our kitchen. The caller ID brightly displayed the main office number for our wedding venue, the historic estate we had booked nearly a year ago. My stomach immediately did a tiny, nervous flip. Usually, when a venue calls a groom this close to the actual event date, it means there is a logistical nightmare unfolding behind the scenes. You instantly start imagining a double booking, a massive catering disaster, a sudden issue with the local noise ordinances, or a problem with the liability insurance. I cleared my throat, put my heavy ceramic coffee mug down on the counter, and answered the call, deliberately putting it on speaker so Clara could hear whatever issue we were about to tackle. It was Mr. Sterling, the senior estate manager. However, He did not greet me with his usual warm, booming, professional cheerfulness. His voice was incredibly tight, cautious, and laced with a deep, unmistakable sense of severe professional concern. He asked if I was sitting down. I told him I was standing in my kitchen, but I was listening intently. He took a very deep, audible breath through the phone and carefully explained that his front office had received a highly unusual, incredibly aggressive phone call right when they opened their doors for business at 8 in the morning. A woman explicitly claiming to be my mother, Evelyn, had called the main administrative line. But she was not alone on the call. She had conferenced in a young man who confidently and explicitly identified himself to the venue staff as me. He claimed on a recorded line to be Ethan. Clara immediately stopped breathing. Her hand froze over the seating chart. I stared blankly at the phone resting on the counter. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it paralyzed me for a solid 10 seconds. My brain literally could not process the depth of the betrayal. Mr. Sterling explained, his voice maintaining a careful neutrality, that this imposter, this person actively claiming to be me, told the venue coordinator that Clara and I had tragically called off the engagement. The imposter spun a wild tale, claiming it was a highly volatile, mutual split, that the relationship was completely destroyed, and that the upcoming wedding was officially, permanently canceled. But they did not stop there. If they had merely tried to cancel the event out of pure spite, it would have been incredibly vindictive, but the reality was so much darker, so much more calculated, and so deeply financially motivated than simple family revenge. Mr. Sterling began to read the detailed notes directly from the inbound call log. The imposter claiming to be me had explicitly told the venue that since the massive, non-refundable deposit had already been fully paid in cash from my bank account, the family simply could not let such premium real estate and premium catering go to waste. The imposter formally requested that the entire event contract, the expensive catering package, the custom floral arrangements, and the premium open bar be legally transferred entirely into the name of Julian, my younger brother. They demanded the event type be instantly changed in the computer system from a wedding reception to a massive, lavish college graduation party. They were not just trying to ruin my wedding to punish me. They were actively, criminally plotting to steal it for themselves. They wanted to violently hijack the venue I spent months finding, use the thousands of dollars of my hard-earned salary I had put down as a deposit, and effortlessly repurpose the entire luxurious event to celebrate Julian finally getting his mediocre degree. They actually genuinely thought that because we shared the same last name, the venue would just blindly swap the binding contracts without verifying the identity of the primary account holder. They thought they were completely entitled to my financial assets. They viewed my money, my meticulous planning, and my future as community property that they could simply reallocate to the golden child whenever they saw fit. It was the exact same sickening, greedy dynamic that played out when my grandfather passed away 5 years ago. During his solemn funeral, while I was actually mourning the man who taught me how to fish, my parents were viciously arguing in the church parking lot over his estate, the specifics of his inheritance, and who got to control the narrative of his remaining wealth. They view absolutely everything and everyone through the cold, calculating lens of what they can extract. Mr. Sterling told me that the venue staff immediately flagged the call as highly suspicious and potentially fraudulent. The imposter did not know the secure, alphanumeric passcode Clara and I had established for our account on day one. The imposter also could not verify the exact dollar amount of the final balance due, nor did they know the name of our specific catering liaison. When the trained staff pressed for standard identity verification, my mother reportedly became highly combative. She demanded to speak to upper management, screaming that they were VIP clients, threatening to leave devastating, business-ruining reviews online, and claiming the venue was trying to steal their money if their simple administrative request was not immediately honored. Mr. Sterling assured me, sensing my rising panic, that absolutely nothing had been changed in their system. He confirmed our wedding was completely secure, the financial contract was locked down tight, and he had personally placed a strict security protocol on our file. Anyone calling about the event would now have to provide a physical photo ID in person. He then gently advised me that the venue automatically records all inbound calls for quality and training purposes, and he had already secured and encrypted the audio file of the entire fraudulent exchange in case I needed to take further legal action. I thanked him, my voice entirely monotone, a hollow echo in the kitchen, and I ended the call. I stood there, the silence ringing loudly in my ears like a physical weight. Clara was looking at me, her beautiful face pale, her hands visibly shaking as she gripped the edge of the granite counter. She asked me, her voice trembling, what we were going to do. She asked if we needed to hire armed security for the wedding day. She asked if we needed to move the venue entirely to hide from them. I looked at her, and the final, lingering shred of familial obligation inside my soul completely, permanently incinerated. I did not feel sad. I did not feel the familiar sting of betrayal. I felt a cold, hyper-focused, absolute rage. They had crossed a massive, unforgivable legal line. This was no longer just petty family gossip or emotional manipulation at a Thanksgiving dinner. This was a documented, verifiable attempt at identity theft. This was blatant, intentional financial fraud. This was a criminal attempt to manipulate a legally binding contract and steal thousands of dollars of services that I had worked 60-hour weeks to afford. They truly thought they could outsmart me because I had always played nice. They thought my silence over the years was a sign of inherent weakness. They thought I would just take the hit, roll over, cry about it in private, and let Julian have his stolen, luxurious parade. I picked up my phone, unlocked the screen, and looked directly into Clara's eyes. I told her we were not just going to hire security guards to stand at a door. I told her we were going to drop a legal anvil on their heads so incredibly heavy that they would never, ever recover from the impact. The very first phone call I made was absolutely not to the police, and it was certainly not to my parents to scream at them. My first call was to Victoria Vance. Victoria Vance is an absolute, undeniable shark of an attorney in our city. I knew of her stellar, terrifying reputation because my corporate firm occasionally consulted with her office on highly complex, high-stakes commercial litigation. But her real, feared reputation was built in the trenches of family law. She handled the most vicious, high-net-worth divorce cases in the state. She managed the most brutal, scorched-earth child custody battles you could possibly imagine. She was notoriously expensive, charging a premium hourly rate, notoriously ruthless in her legal strategies, and entirely devoid of human sentimentality when it came to the law. She was exactly the kind of unfeeling, precise weapon I needed to deploy against people who thought societal rules and basic decency did not apply to them. I managed to leverage a few professional favors and secured an emergency consultation appointment with her the very next afternoon. Clara and I walked into her sleek, glass-walled downtown office, feeling completely out of our depth but resolute. Victoria was sitting behind a massive, imposing mahogany desk, reviewing a thick stack of legal briefs. She did not offer us warm platitudes, she did not ask how wedding planning was going, and she did not offer sympathetic smiles. She simply pointed to the two heavy leather chairs across from her and told me to start talking from the very beginning. I laid it all out. I did not hold back a single detail. I told her about the systemic financial abuse spanning over a decade, the utterly drained college fund, the Thanksgiving ambush where they demanded I cancel my wedding, the vicious public smear campaign currently being led by my cousin Oliver, and the network of spies my mother had deployed, including my cousin Sophia. Finally, I told her about the incredibly brazen, desperate phone call to Mr. Sterling at the venue. I slid a sleek USB drive across the desk. It contained the downloaded, unedited audio recording the venue had graciously provided. Next to it, I placed a massive, meticulously organized binder containing printed, time-stamped screenshots of every single defamatory Facebook post, text message, and email my family had sent. Victoria listened in absolute, terrifying silence. Her sharp eyes scanned the documents I placed in front of her, her expression unreadable. When I finished my long explanation, she leaned back in her expensive chair, steepled her fingers together, and actually smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant, predatory smile. She told me, her voice smooth and confident, that toxic families operate under the incredibly foolish assumption that familial bonds somehow provide a magical blanket immunity from civil and criminal liability. She said they rely entirely on the victim's inherent shame and desire for privacy to avoid facing severe consequences. She clicked on the audio file on her computer screen, listened to my mother's screaming voice for about 30 seconds, and stated clearly that attempting to impersonate me to alter a high-value financial contract was textbook wire fraud. The highly public posts falsely accusing me of elder abuse and financial malice were textbook defamation and libel. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine, and asked me what my ultimate goal was. Did I want to file a massive, highly publicized lawsuit and drag them through civil court for financial damages? Did I want to see them bankrupt? I looked at Clara, who gave me a firm nod. Then I looked back at Victoria. I told her I did not want a single cent of their money. Their money was an entire illusion anyway. Their lifestyle was mostly built on crippling credit card debt, multiple remortgages, and my past financial bailouts. I told her I wanted absolute, permanent terror. I wanted a legal wall built so high, so thick, and so intimidating that they would not even dare look in my general direction ever again. I wanted them to know, unequivocally and legally, that the game they had played for 30 years was permanently over. Victoria nodded, her eyes flashing with genuine professional approval. That is exactly how the formal, devastating cease and desist campaign was born. Victoria did not just have her paralegal send a generic, templated warning letter. She personally crafted highly individualized, meticulously detailed legal nightmares for every single person involved in the conspiracy against my peace. The heavy, certified letter addressed to my mother and father explicitly detailed the legal definitions of criminal identity theft, wire fraud, and tortious interference with a business contract. It aggressively referenced the exact date, time, and duration of their fraudulent phone call to the venue, noting that a full audio recording was currently in the possession of legal counsel. It clearly and coldly stated that any further attempt to contact me, Clara, my employer, or any vendor associated with our upcoming wedding would result in an immediate application for a permanent restraining order. Furthermore, it promised the swift filing of a massive civil lawsuit for severe emotional distress, harassment, and defamation. The letter addressed directly to Julian was even sharper, designed to puncture his inflated ego. It outlined his direct, undeniable complicity in the fraudulent phone call, casually but pointedly noting that wire fraud carries significant, life-altering federal penalties. It strongly advised him to immediately secure his own independent legal counsel if he decided to continue harassing us, noting that his parents' complete financial inability to defend him in a protracted court battle would leave him entirely exposed to maximum liability. There were also separate, equally terrifying legal warnings sent via courier to my cousin Oliver and the other busybody relatives who had actively participated in the online smear campaign. These letters demanded the immediate, permanent deletion of all defamatory posts under the strict threat of immediate libel litigation that could ruin their own careers and businesses. We paid Victoria her hefty retainer fee directly from my recent salary bonus, shook her firm hand, and walked out of her office feeling 10 feet tall. The letters were sent out that afternoon via certified mail, requiring a physical signature upon delivery to ensure nobody could claim they hadn't seen them. 2 days later, the digital delivery confirmations started rapidly rolling into Victoria's office inbox. The immediate, absolute silence that fell over my family was absolutely deafening. The frantic, aggressive, self-righteous energy they had been riding for weeks completely evaporated into thin air the exact second they realized they were no longer dealing with their compliant, obedient son. They suddenly realized they were dealing with a highly aggressive, deeply connected corporate attorney who was perfectly willing and legally capable of completely ruining their lives. Oliver immediately deleted every single post from his Facebook page, scrubbed his digital footprint, and essentially vanished from the internet. Sophia completely blocked herself from our lives without a single word. But my father, Arthur, is a deeply stubborn man whose towering arrogance consistently overrides his basic survival instincts. He simply could not handle the absolute humiliation of being legally served intimidating papers by his own offspring. He felt his fragile, unearned patriarchal authority completely slipping away. But he was far too terrified of Victoria Vance's explicit legal threats to actually contact me directly. So, He made the incredibly stupid, entirely fatal mistake of trying to triangulate the situation. He bypassed me completely, ignored the spirit of the legal warning, and called Clara's mother, Mrs. Bennet. He honestly thought he could use his age and his perceived status as a suffering patriarch to emotionally manipulate another parent. He called Mrs. Bennet's home line, put on his best, most concerned, deeply suffering father voice, and literally begged her to talk some sense into Clara and me. He dramatically claimed I was having a severe, sudden mental breakdown due to work stress. He claimed I was destroying the sacred family unit over a simple, harmless misunderstanding about a venue booking. He asked Mrs. Bennet if there was any possible way she could intervene, act as a mediator, and fix this mess before I did permanent, irreparable damage to the family legacy. He severely, hilariously underestimated the incredible woman who raised my fiancé. Mrs. Bennet is a formidable retired high school principal who spent 30 grueling years dealing with highly manipulative teenagers and their equally manipulative, deeply entitled parents. She does not suffer fools lightly, and she certainly, absolutely does not tolerate pathetic people who attempt to attack her daughter's happiness. According to Clara, who heard the entire legendary exchange on speakerphone, Mrs. Bennet listened patiently, without interrupting once, to Arthur's long, rambling, pitiful monologue. She let him dig his own grave completely, letting the silence stretch. When he finally ran out of breath and desperately asked for her help, Mrs. Bennet responded with a voice so icy, so perfectly calm, it could have frozen the sun itself. She told Arthur, enunciating every single word, that she had read the drafted police reports, she had personally heard the venue recording, and she had seen the undeniable bank statements proving his decades of financial abuse. She told him that Ethan was not destroying anything of actual value. She clearly stated, "Your son is not having a mental breakdown, Arthur. He is finally having a long overdue breakthrough. He is actively, bravely rebuilding his life from the toxic ashes you and your wife intentionally created. If you ever call this number again, or if you ever approach my daughter in public, I will personally ensure you spend your retirement dealing with aggressive harassment charges and a restraining order." Then, she slammed the phone down. That was the absolute, undeniable final blow. The crushing, suffocating realization that they had absolutely no allies left anywhere. They could not manipulate me anymore. They could not intimidate Clara. They could not charm or fool Mrs. Bennet. And they were absolutely, legally terrified of Victoria Vance. The massive fortress they had built around themselves for decades, a fragile fortress built entirely on guilt, manufactured obligation, and emotional blackmail, had completely and totally collapsed in a matter of days. The ugly truth was finally, blindingly exposed to everyone, and they had absolutely nowhere left to hide. The morning of our wedding finally arrived, exactly 2 incredibly quiet, peaceful weeks after the legal letters were delivered. I woke up naturally at 6 in the morning in the luxurious master suite of the venue's guest house. Clara was still fast asleep, curled comfortably under a thick, white down blanket, her breathing slow and steady. The gentle morning sunlight was slowly creeping across the polished hardwood floorboards. I quietly slipped out of bed, made myself a cup of strong black coffee, and stepped out onto the private balcony. The air was crisp, holding the perfect chill of an American spring morning. The massive, ancient oak trees surrounding the estate were swaying gently in the morning breeze, and the perfectly manicured lawns stretched out toward the horizon, glistening with dew. I stood there, leaning my forearms against the cool wooden railing, and took a deep, completely unrestricted breath. For the very first time in my 33 years of life, my chest did not feel tight with the familiar, crushing anxiety of family expectations. I was not worried about whether my mother would dramatically complain about the temperature of the catered food. I was not stressed about whether Julian would cause a massive, embarrassing scene because he wasn't seated at the absolute center of the head table. I was not actively dreading my father's inevitable, passive-aggressive comments about how much the floral arrangements must have cost and how I was wasting money. The sheer, brilliant, magnificent absence of their toxic, draining energy was the greatest wedding gift I could have possibly received. It was a purity of experience I never thought I would be allowed to have. The ceremony itself was incredibly beautiful. It was intimate, deeply personal, and completely devoid of the performative, theatrical nonsense my family usually required for public events. We had exactly 60 guests in attendance. Every single wooden chair on that lawn was filled with someone who genuinely, unconditionally loved us, actively supported our union, and wanted to see us thrive as a couple. There were no fake smiles, no whispered gossip in the back rows. My old college mentor, Professor Miller, graciously officiated the ceremony. He is a man who knows my entire, unvarnished history. He is a man who literally saw me working grueling warehouse night shifts just to pay for my assigned textbooks when my parents completely abandoned me financially to fund Julian's California escapades. He stood at the altar and delivered a stunning, profoundly moving speech about how true family is absolutely not defined by mere genetics or shared bloodlines. True family, he said, looking warmly out at the crowd of our chosen loved ones, is defined by consistent, loving actions, mutual respect, and the daily, active choice to protect one another's peace. When Clara finally walked down the aisle, the string quartet playing softly in the background, she looked absolutely radiant. She looked like peace personified. When I took her soft hands in mine at the altar, my hands did not shake. My voice did not crack. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The reception that followed the ceremony was an explosion of pure, unadulterated joy. There were no awkward family tensions to navigate, no forced smiles for the hired photographer, no walking on eggshells. We served an incredible meal, the wine flowed freely, and the laughter echoed across the estate. My best man, Liam, delivered a hilarious, roaring toast that had the entire room, including Clara's stoic father, in literal tears of laughter. We danced for hours under the warm string lights strung across the vast stone patio. Toward the very end of the night, while everyone was happily distracted by the massive dessert table and the late-night coffee station, I briefly stepped away toward the shadowy edge of the patio to quickly check my phone, just to ensure there were no last-minute emergencies from the vendors or the transportation company. I unlocked the screen. There was one single, glaringly unread email in my primary inbox. The sender name boldly displayed was Julian. Despite Victoria Vance's incredibly strict, terrifying legal warnings, his sheer, boundless entitlement apparently overrode his completely justified fear of federal litigation. I stared at the notification, taking a slow breath. I opened the email, genuinely expecting a furious, explosive, profanity-laced rant or a deeply manipulative, theatrical suicide threat, which was his usual exhausted tactic whenever he felt completely cornered and ignored. Instead, what I saw was the most pathetic, transparently desperate piece of emotional manipulation I had ever witnessed in my life. The subject line was completely blank. The body of the email consisted of a single, rambling, poorly punctuated paragraph. He wrote that he was incredibly sad sitting all alone at home while I was out partying with strangers. He claimed he still didn't understand why I was cruelly throwing away my own flesh and blood over a stupid minor party planner misunderstanding. He actually wrote that he forgave me for being so dramatic and sensitive, and that he really, truly hoped I was happy with my new fake family. It was a textbook, classic attempt to play the wounded victim. It was a desperate, last-ditch bid to make me feel a pang of guilt on the happiest day of my entire life, an attempt to siphon just a tiny bit of my energy back into his black hole of need. But Julian is notoriously lazy, and his attention to crucial detail has always been virtually non-existent. In his frantic rush to send this manipulative, guilt-tripping email from his smartphone while probably drinking on my parents' couch, he had accidentally included an attachment. He most likely meant to attach an old, sentimental photo of us playing together as kids to really play on my nostalgia. Instead, his clumsy fingers had attached a saved Excel spreadsheet document from his phone's files. I tapped the attachment icon, the screen loading for a second before it opened cleanly on my display. The file was proudly titled, Julian Service List XLSX. I stared at it. It was a highly detailed, incredibly comprehensive list of nearly 80 people. There were names of his old frat brothers, various online influencer friends who likely didn't even know his last name, and a massive list of our extended relatives. Next to the names were meticulously organized columns for dietary restrictions, vegan, gluten-free, plus ones, and even VIP seating preferences near the main bar. The event date explicitly listed at the very top of the spreadsheet was exactly 1 day after my scheduled wedding date. He had not just been randomly complaining to our mother about my wedding stealing his precious spotlight. He had spent weeks actively, meticulously planning a massive, fully catered graduation party for himself. He fully, genuinely intended to use my expensive venue, my customized catering package, and my massive financial deposit the very second his mother successfully hijacked the contract over the phone. He had even boldly planned the VIP seating chart for a luxurious venue he absolutely did not own and could never afford in his entire life. The sheer, monumental audacity of it all was so vast, so incredibly absurd, that I did not even feel a single spark of anger. The anger was gone. I just stood there in the cool night air, looking at the spreadsheet, and I laughed out loud. It was not a bitter chuckle. It was a genuine, deep, echoing belly laugh. It was the absolute, undeniable physical proof of their deep sociopathy, neatly wrapped up in a careless, accidental email attachment. They were living in a completely different reality. I did not reply to his email. I did not forward the spreadsheet to Victoria Vance to initiate a lawsuit. I simply did not need to. They were entirely, hopelessly pathetic, living in a delusional reality where they thought they were the main characters of the universe and everyone else was just an NPC designed to fund their lives. I simply hit the delete button, permanently erasing his email, his ridiculous spreadsheet, and his toxic existence from my inbox. I slid the phone back into the inner pocket of my tailored tuxedo, turned around, and walked back into the warm glow of the dance floor to hold my beautiful wife. Clara and I spent 2 incredible, uninterrupted weeks in a secluded luxury cabin in the mountains for our honeymoon. We completely unplugged. No cell reception, no internet access, no frantic work emails, and absolutely no family drama. Just the quiet, soothing sound of nature, long hikes during the crisp days, and sitting by the crackling fire with a glass of wine at night. It was exactly the kind of deep, restorative, profound peace we desperately needed to officially begin our marriage and wash the lingering residue of my family off our lives. When we finally packed up the car and returned to the city, the reality of everyday American life slowly settled back in. We unpacked our bags, sorted through the massive pile of accumulated mail on the kitchen counter, and I finally, cautiously turned my primary cell phone back on. A massive flood of missed calls, text messages, and calendar notifications instantly populated the glowing screen. Most were warm congratulations from colleagues at my firm and friends who couldn't make the wedding. But sitting quietly at the very bottom of the voicemail inbox was a single, ominous audio message from a completely blocked number. I knew immediately who had bypassed the digital block by using a different phone line or a burner app. It was Evelyn. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, put the phone down on the wood, turned the volume up, and pressed play. I wanted Clara to hear it, not because I valued the message or feared its contents, but because we had solemnly promised to face every single reality of this situation completely together as a unified front. The voicemail started with a heavy, deeply theatrical sigh. Evelyn's voice sounded incredibly frail, a carefully calculated, masterful performance of a broken, grieving mother. She did not say congratulations on your marriage. She did not ask how the wedding was or where we went for our honeymoon. She immediately launched into a bitter, resentful, guilt-laden monologue. "Ethan," she whispered hoarsely into the phone, the audio crackling slightly, "I just want you to know that your father's heart is failing because of the immense stress you've caused this family. I truly hope you and that woman are happy sitting in your big, expensive house, knowing you have completely, utterly destroyed this family. We tried to give you absolutely everything growing up, we sacrificed so much for you, and you threw us away like garbage just because you couldn't stand to share the spotlight with your own brother for one single day. You will deeply, painfully regret this when we are dead and gone. I don't know who you are anymore. You are a stranger to me." I listened to it in its entirety. There was absolutely no apology for the attempted wire fraud. There was no acknowledgement of the terrifying legal cease and desist letters sitting on their kitchen table. There was absolutely no remorse for attempting to steal my venue and ruin my life. Just the exact same, tired, repetitive narrative where she was the eternal, blameless, suffering victim, and I was the cruel, ungrateful, wealthy monster who abandoned them. Clara looked at me across the table, her eyes filled with a quiet, understanding sympathy. She reached out, covered my hand with hers, and asked me softly if I was okay. I looked at the phone, watched the little digital playhead reach the end of the recording, and I smiled. It was a real, genuine smile. I told Clara I was more than okay. I told her I was completely, undeniably free. I firmly hit the delete button, erasing the voicemail forever. It was the absolute last time I ever heard my mother's voice, and to my profound surprise, it did not hurt at all. The wound had finally healed over. I turned my attention back to the massive stack of physical mail we had collected while we were away. Mostly utility bills, junk mail flyers for local real estate, and a few late, heartfelt wedding cards with checks inside. But nestled perfectly in the middle of the chaotic pile was a thick, premium cream-colored envelope addressed specifically to me in elegant, looping cursive handwriting. It was from my Aunt Beatrice. Aunt Beatrice was my father's older sister. She was a quiet, intensely observant woman who always sat at the absolute edge of the family gatherings, never participating in the vicious gossip, never openly taking sides, and never once challenging Arthur's booming authority. She had formally, politely declined the wedding invitation without any explanation right after Oliver's explosive Facebook post went viral, so I had naturally assumed she had simply fallen in line with the rest of the toxic family regime. I carefully grabbed a letter opener, sliced open the thick envelope, and unfolded the heavy stationery. The handwritten letter inside was 3 full pages long. She started the letter by profusely, deeply apologizing for her silence over the past year. She wrote that for her entire adult life, she had watched my father and mother emotionally manipulate, financially drain, and entirely control everyone in their immediate orbit. She admitted, with heartbreaking honesty, that she had stayed completely quiet all these years simply out of pure, unadulterated cowardice. She was deeply terrified of becoming the primary target of their vicious, coordinated smear campaigns, so she kept her head down, smiled politely, and played the role of the compliant, silent sister. But then, she wrote, she watched exactly what happened to me. She watched me stand up on that porch and lay out the financial receipts. She heard through the panicked family grapevine about the brutal, uncompromising legal boundaries I had set with the terrifying corporate lawyer. She watched me systematically dismantle their ironclad control over my life, refusing to bow to their insane demands, refusing to sacrifice my own bright future to fund Julian's endless entitlement. Ethan, the final, powerful paragraph read, I know you currently think you lost your family during this whole horrific ordeal. I know the absolute silence from our side of the aisle must feel like a massive, unforgivable betrayal. But I urgently need you to know the absolute truth. You did not lose a family. You simply uncovered exactly who they were all along. You held up a clear mirror to their toxicity, and when they absolutely hated the reflection staring back at them, they tried to shatter you instead of changing themselves. Do not ever, for a single second, apologize for protecting your peace. Do not ever apologize for protecting your beautiful wife. I am incredibly, deeply proud of the man you have become, a man strong enough to break a generational curse that I was far too weak to ever fight. I read that single paragraph 3 times. The validation, coming directly from inside the family structure, from someone who knew the exact monsters I was dealing with, was the final, critical piece of closure I needed to move on. I took a pushpin and firmly pinned Aunt Beatrice's letter to the corkboard above my home office desk, right next to a photo of Clara. It has been nearly 2 full years since the wedding. I have not spoken a single syllable to Arthur, Evelyn, or Julian since the day Victoria Vance served them those legal papers. I heard through the distant grapevine that Julian's graduation party was eventually held in my parents' cramped, overgrown backyard, and it was a miserable, tense, heavily budgeted affair. I heard he still hasn't managed to hold down a steady job, and my parents are currently struggling with massive, crushing credit card debt and potentially facing foreclosure to maintain the illusion of their lifestyle. But that is no longer my problem. My life is incredibly peaceful. My promotion and our careful budgeting allowed Clara and me to buy a small, profitable investment property. We spend our weekends hiking trails, hosting warm dinners for our chosen family, and actually, genuinely enjoying the quiet moments of our life together. I learned the absolute hardest way possible that setting a firm boundary is not an act of aggression. Setting a boundary is an act of profound, necessary self-preservation. When you finally stop allowing toxic people to cross your lines and drain your resources, they will scream, they will cry, and they will try to passionately convince the entire world that you are the ultimate villain. Let them scream into the void. Their reaction to your boundary is entirely their responsibility, not yours. You absolutely do not owe your sanity, your salary, or your future to people who only view you as a disposable resource. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a brutal, unforgiving line in the sand to protect your own peace, your inheritance, or your mental health, only to have them try to destroy you with a lawsuit or a smear campaign for it? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and your courage inspires me to keep telling these stories. And please, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey. Thank you for listening.